Marcus adjusted the collar of his shirt in the small mirror above his dresser, wishing it looked newer than it did. The shirt was pressed as neatly as he could manage, though its faded edges betrayed how many years it had served him. His daughter, Layla, sat cross-legged on the bed, watching him with a curious smile that made him feel both nervous and grounded. "Daddy, you look like a prince," she said in her small, certain voice. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head, though her words meant more to him than she would ever know. Tonight wasn't about feeling like a prince, it was about stepping into a world he hadn't dared visit since Layla's mother passed away. It was his first blind date in nearly 7 years, and the thought of it left his palms sweaty. He only had $50 in his wallet, barely enough to cover a modest dinner, but he was determined not to let that stop him. As he laced up his shoes, Marcus thought about all the reasons he almost cancelled. He hated the idea of looking foolish if his date wanted something extravagant. He hated the thought of being judged for what he couldn't afford. But more than anything, he hated the loneliness that crept in after he put Layla to bed every night. His friends had insisted he needed to try again, to meet someone, to let himself live a little. So, against his instincts, he had agreed to this blind date set up by a coworker. Now, as he prepared to leave, he tried to silence the voice in his head that whispered he didn't belong in places like this anymore. The restaurant he chose was small but respectable, just enough for a date without being flashy. When he walked in, the dim golden lights reflected off polished wood tables, and couples leaned close across candlelit meals. The atmosphere was warm, inviting, but Marcus still felt like an outsider. He gave his name to the host and was led to a table near the center. Sitting down, he took a deep breath, rehearsing lines in his head. He wanted to come across as confident, even though his heart raced like a drum. What Marcus didn't notice was the man seated in the corner by the window, a tall figure with an air of quiet authority. Dressed in a sharp suit, the man seemed absorbed in his meal, but his eyes flickered toward Marcus with faint curiosity. There was something about the nervous but determined single dad, straightening his silverware and folding his hands as though he were preparing for the most important interview of his life. The man in the corner was Alexander Carter, a CEO whose decisions shaped entire companies. To him, Marcus was just another diner at first glance, but something told him to keep watching. Marcus, oblivious, kept reminding himself of one thing: tonight, no matter how much money he had, he was going to show up as himself. He was going to try. And for a man who had spent years putting his daughter first, that alone felt like a brave gamble. Marcus sat rigidly at the table, glancing at the door every few seconds as the minutes ticked by. His date was late, 15 minutes, then 20, and with each passing moment, his nerves grew tighter. He sipped his water slowly to give his hands something to do, but his mind kept wandering to Layla at home with his neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who had promised to keep her company with popcorn and a movie. Finally, the door opened, and a tall woman in a red dress walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She scanned the room with disinterest before her eyes landed on Marcus. He rose quickly, nearly knocking his chair over, and extended his hand. "Vanessa?" he asked, his voice a mixture of hope and relief. She nodded curtly, her eyes flicking down to his modest suit before she slid into her chair. From the moment she sat, Marcus sensed the imbalance. Her perfume was expensive, her manner crisp, and her gaze wandered as if she were waiting for something more exciting to happen. He tried to ignore the knot in his stomach and offered a warm smile, asking about her day. She responded politely but briefly, quickly steering the conversation toward vacations she had taken, wines she preferred, and how she was used to a certain standard of life. Marcus nodded, smiling when he could, but deep down he felt his $50 burning like a secret in his pocket. He kept the menu closed in front of him, already knowing what he could afford and hoping she wouldn't notice his carefulness when ordering. Determined not to let the evening collapse, Marcus began speaking about the one subject that always lit his world, Layla. His face softened, his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time that evening, his words flowed naturally. He told Vanessa about Layla's love for drawing, how she insisted on painting a rainbow on his work lunchbox last week, and how she believed he could fix anything with just tape and a smile. Though Vanessa smiled politely at first, Marcus could see her interest waning. She shifted in her seat, checked her phone once, and stirred her drink absent-mindedly. Still, Marcus continued, because talking about Layla reminded him of who he was, a father doing his best, no matter how messy life got. Across the restaurant, Alexander Carter, the CEO in the corner, had put down his fork. He leaned back slightly, observing with quiet curiosity. He noticed the tension between Marcus's earnestness and Vanessa's aloofness, saw the man's modest suit, his hesitant glances at the menu, and yet the unmistakable pride when he spoke about his daughter. To Alexander, it was rare to see someone radiate such sincerity in a world where appearances often overshadowed substance. As the evening dragged on, Vanessa made a passing remark about preferring men who could keep up with her lifestyle, which Marcus absorbed silently, though it landed heavy in his chest. He didn't argue, didn't defend, he only smiled faintly, determined to keep the evening respectful. And while Vanessa remained unimpressed, the man in the corner grew more intrigued, realizing that sometimes, dignity under quiet strain revealed more about a person than wealth ever could. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus could already sense that the date had been a disaster. Vanessa's forced smile and distant eyes told him everything he needed to know, but he still held on to his manners, refusing to let the night end without grace. The waiter approached with the bill, setting the small leather folder gently on the table, and in that instant Marcus's chest tightened as if the weight of the world had been placed before him. He had been careful, ordering only a modest meal and water, but Vanessa had not restrained herself. 2 glasses of wine, an appetizer, and dessert sat like bold reminders of how out of place he felt. His mind raced as he slid the folder closer, pretending calm, though sweat prickled at the back of his neck. Opening it, his eyes darted to the total, and his heart sank. It was nearly double the $50 he had tucked in his wallet. For a fleeting moment, shame surged through him. He imagined Vanessa's disdain, the waiter's raised brow, the humiliation of admitting he couldn't pay. He fumbled for his wallet, rehearsing in his head how to explain, how to perhaps ask if part of it could be covered later, but before he could utter a word, a shadow fell across the table. Marcus looked up to see the tall man from the corner, Alexander Carter, standing beside him with quiet confidence. The entire restaurant seemed to pause, diners glancing over curiously as Alexander placed a sleek black card on the table and said in a calm, steady voice, "Dinner's on me." The room went still, Vanessa's eyes widened, her lips parting in stunned surprise, while Marcus froze, his breath caught in his throat. He stammered, shaking his head quickly, "No, I can't, sir, I can't accept that," but Alexander's gaze was unwavering, a mixture of firmness and kindness that silenced any protest. "You can," he replied, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Then, turning to Marcus, he added, "But after this, I'd like to have a word with you outside." Confusion flickered across Marcus's face. He didn't know who this man was, why he was intervening, or what kind of word he wanted to have with him. Embarrassment burned in his chest, but there was also a strange sense of relief washing over him, as if someone had pulled him back from the edge of drowning. Vanessa, however, leaned back in her chair, clearly intrigued by the unexpected turn of events, her earlier disinterest replaced with sudden attention, though Marcus noticed the change with bitter clarity. The waiter, relieved of awkwardness, whisked away the folder with a nod, leaving the table heavy with silence. Marcus cleared his throat, thanking Alexander quietly, though the words felt insufficient for the magnitude of the gesture. Alexander gave only a brief nod before stepping away, his calm presence commanding the room even as he returned to his seat. Vanessa leaned closer then, her tone suddenly softened, "Do you know him?" But Marcus could only shake his head, still reeling. Inside, he felt a storm, gratitude, confusion, and unease all colliding, but one truth stood firm: his night had changed in a way he couldn't yet understand, and whatever awaited him outside with the stranger might alter his life more than any blind date ever could. The cool night air wrapped around Marcus as he stepped out of the restaurant, his breath visible in the faint glow of the streetlights. His heart was still hammering from the unexpected scene inside, and every step toward the tall man waiting near a sleek black car only heightened the swirl of questions in his mind. Alexander Carter stood with his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed yet commanding, as though the world naturally bent to his presence. When Marcus approached, uncertain and still embarrassed, Alexander turned to him with a faint smile. "You handled yourself well in there," he began, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of someone used to being heard. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to say, mumbling his thanks though he felt undeserving. "I didn't mean for you to pay," Marcus added quickly, but Alexander waved the words off with a simple gesture. "I wasn't paying for her," he said, glancing back toward the restaurant. "I was paying attention to you." That left Marcus momentarily speechless. Alexander continued, his tone growing thoughtful. "I heard the way you spoke about your daughter. The pride, the responsibility, the integrity in your words, it struck me. Men like you are rare. You may not know this, but those qualities are worth far more than money in the world I live in." Confused, Marcus furrowed his brow. "And what world is that?" he asked. Alexander extended his hand. "Alexander Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises." The name meant little at first, but then Marcus recalled the company's job postings he had applied to months ago, never hearing back, never expecting a chance. His eyes widened as realization dawned. Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "I've been searching for people who can lead, who can inspire trust, not just people with impressive resumes. You've already proven to me tonight that you carry something I can't teach, integrity. I want you to come by my office tomorrow." Marcus blinked, struggling to process the offer. He thought of the long nights at his construction job, the applications he filled out between making Layla's lunches and tucking her into bed, the countless rejections that chipped away at his hope. And now, standing on a quiet street outside a restaurant where he couldn't even afford the bill, opportunity was staring him in the face. "Why me?" Marcus asked softly, disbelief thick in his voice. Alexander's answer was simple, yet firm. "Because you remind me of the man I used to be before success hardened me. I see a father who refuses to quit, even when life gives him nothing but obstacles. That's the kind of man I want on my team." Marcus swallowed hard, emotion welling up in his chest, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I'll be there." They shook hands, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt as though the weight on his shoulders had lightened. The blind date had been a failure in every imaginable way, but out of it came an unexpected turning point, a chance not just for a career, but for a future where he and Layla could finally breathe. As Alexander's car pulled away, Marcus stood beneath the streetlight, a smile tugging at his lips, realizing that sometimes the smallest gamble, showing up with nothing more than $50 and hope, could open doors he never dreamed were waiting for him.